It's March 20th, 2022, and this is special coverage of the war in Ukraine, and today's episode is a little different. If you're on the internet, you may have noticed a theme popping up regularly in regards to the war in Ukraine. There are many variants, but the key talking point for the West is regular Russians are to blame for the war in Ukraine as much as Putin and Lavrov. I understand that sentiment. I really do. How does a nation of 140 million tolerate the Kremlin's brutal whims? And why do Russians keep voting for Putin? Why don't they overthrow him? Why don't they believe sources outside of Russia that Ukrainians are being slaughtered? And this frustration is easy to understand. However, the answer may not be so easy to digest. We've covered before the prevalence of Russian propaganda in the West, how it's meant to sow confusion and distrust, how it distorts, distracts, dismays, and dismisses the truth. The same is true of propaganda in Russia itself. The overwhelming majority of news outlets are funded or directed by the Kremlin, its state-run television, state narratives. And for most Russians, this narrative is the absolute truth. They simply don't believe that Russia could be killing civilians. It's impossible. Claims otherwise are the product of Western propaganda. So, for this episode, we turn to Sophia Shirogorova, a Russian activist historian, to provide us a comprehensive history of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Specifically, we asked her to tell us the story of Putin and Ukraine. Since Russia invaded Ukraine, it's estimated that over 200,000 Russians have left Russia. For many, where we are now is the inevitable conclusion for Russia: consolidation of power, control of media, authoritarianism. Admittedly, I was skeptical of hosting a Russian historian.
Yeah, I'm also a Russian oppositioner. So, my point of view, it's a point of view of Russian opposition. But I suppose that's the right point of view now.
Yeah. But I think we're in good hands. I wanted to start with the NATO question. Does Russia really see NATO as a threat? But first, we have to go back to the early 90s. We look at Russia in its infancy when Boris Yeltsin was president. In the Baltimore Sun on Sunday, December 21st, 1991, quote, "In yet another sign that the disintegration of the Soviet Union was turning global politics upside down, the Russian president, Boris N. Yeltsin, wrote to NATO yesterday asking it to consider allowing Russia to become a member sometime in the future." End quote. And in that letter to NATO, Yeltsin wrote, quote, "This will contribute to creating a climate of mutual understanding and trust, strengthening stability and cooperation on the European continent. We consider these relations to be very serious and wish to develop this dialogue in each and every direction, both on the political and military levels. Today we are raising a question of Russia's membership in NATO, however regarding it as a long-term political aim." End quote. So I asked Sophia, did Yeltsin really expect Russia to become a NATO member?
I think he knew that, and he he didn't want to join NATO. Yeltsin didn't want that, and Putin also. It's some kind of a part of their, identity, partly based on the idea that Russia is one amongst, great powers. And how could great power join this NATO alliance? It's some kind of humiliation to the great power. All this stuff, yeah. So, and during the whole Russian history and Soviet history, that was, as far as I know, the one episode when Soviet Union asked for membership in NATO, and that was soon after the death of Stalin in 54. Like 1954, yeah, Molotov then asked to join NATO, and that was like, Molotov, are you okay? Are you crazy? No one in Soviet Union and no one in Russia really wants to join NATO for real, not like some bullshit talking, not like some abstract talking, but for real.
So, at the fall of the Soviet Union, Yeltsin made his bid for NATO membership. However disingenuous it may have been, it at least signaled to the world that Russia was committed to being a peaceful member of the global order. The U.S. and Russia officially declared in 1992, quote, "Russia and the United States do not regard each other as potential adversaries," end quote. The Soviet Union had fallen in 1991. Gorbachev's perestroika movement, 1985 to 1991, that was the attempt to shift the Soviet economy to a more Western position, investment, and trade. accompanied the move to make the Soviet Union more democratic as well. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, the world believed, and maybe it was naive, that Russia was committed to democracy and free trade. But then we got Putin. I asked Sophia how we got here.
Maybe this is important to say that Yeltsin, first president of the Russian Federation, he named Putin as his successor. Like, this person is my guy, you should elect them and stuff like that. Okay, that also, I understand that this doesn't sound like, the pure democracy, but that's how things went those days. This is also some rumors that people from Yeltsin family, his brother and her husband, they influenced choice of Putin. Like there were also some financial connections and oligarchs. They promoted Putin in a sense. He had some positions, some important, even key positions. He was the head of apparat presidenta, a kind of a presidential chancellery. I don't know the right term. And also he was in 90s a head of FSB, this secret service. He was right hand Sobchak. Sobchak was chancellor of St. Petersburg, the second important city in Russia. So no, Putin was a prominent person, prominent politician. He was not bright one. He was not, like a great speaker. But he's got an influence, and he got this financial support. He got this support from oligarchs and stuff like that. He even created his own manner which appeared likable to people. This uber masculine, toxic masculine, of course, appearance. Like this is мочить в сортире, to kill people in toilet room. I don't know. It's very toxic, masculine, bully way to say things in Russian. So it's like, in Russia we've got a term gopnik, because it's, this gopnik culture is very toxic masculine. They detest women. They detest all this women stuff. Like once he said that he hasn't bad days like women. He's not a girl, so he has not bad days. Like women with these bad days when they're emotional and stuff like that. This is, like a pure toxic masculinity, and Putin is a sense, an icon of this toxic masculinity. That is important because it explains a lot in his speeches, in his movements, in his manner of speaking. Putin has not communicated directly with Zelensky because of this toxic masculinity. Because from his point of view, Zelensky is, like some clown from the TV show. And it's, unmasculine to speak directly with this clown. Oh, fuck. I'm sorry. It's difficult to explain, but that's important.
Backed by Yeltsin and Russian oligarchs, Putin, the prominent Russian figure, became Russia's president in 2000. It became apparent in his first term that this was not a move towards a freer, more democratic Russia.
He was elected, and so probably first steps were attacking the free press, free media, because, it's some kind of a basic rule for every dictator, suppress the freedom of media. So first of all, it was TV channels, because those days people in Russia, they, and even now, the eldest generation, they watch TV a lot. And TV is probably their one channel of the information. So first of all, Putin, purify the television. All of oppositioners were fired. All of oppositional channels were closed. That was important episode when a channel NTV was, taken from people who own this channel. and just given to the state, like that is normal thing in Russia. NTV was the most prominent one, like the most popular, and there were a lot of smaller channels, and they also were taken from their owners and made a kind of a state property. And when the channel is in a state property, of course, the channel speaks what the government wants from it. There were a lot of, some like conspiracy theories. Those first years of Putin's rule, that was a war in Chechnya. This war in Chechnya for Putin was a purpose, not a purpose, but как бы это оправдание? Justification, sorry. Justification to bring some measures, some strict measures, like, this war on terrorism. You can do everything justifying it with war on terror. In USA, it's also like the same thing. So you can imagine that. But in Russia, in Putin's Russia, it was these measures, they were more strictly. So probably this first years is okay, but then it became more interesting. Like, during these first years, moves that Putin made, they were not clear. Like very few of people understood in those days the direction of his strategy. Even people who are oppositioners now, they thought that Putin was a kind of a democratic leader. Yeah, a little bit bully, a little bit strict. He will keep democracy. I know a lot of people who are nowadays, just like hating themselves for that position, like Gleb Pavlovsky, например, Anna, probably you've heard of him. He was on Putin's side those days, and nowadays he's a oppositioner. Да, как будет отмена выборов губернаторов?
Here, our interpreter steps in.
We have a gubernators, and he denied. And gubernators was chosen by people. For example, we have several parts of Russia, and usually people who live in one part of Russia, they elected the gubernator who will on this position. But then he denied this process, and he started to select the gubernators by himself. So it was a huge step to the autocracy, because autocracy. Because previously people can elect someone who can be a little more opposite to the government or less pro-government. But after this step, he started to choose, and he also can deny this man from this position. So everyone right now becomes pro-government gubernators.
Putin, in the first years of his rule, he just, he reconstructed the political system of Russia, because, in 90s, the local democracy, the local self-government worked in a sense. But during the first years of Putin's rule, everything, this local elections, local freedom of press and stuff like that, it was slowly, but, slowly but firmly diminished.
Putin won in the year 2000 with 54% of the vote. In addition to consolidating media and realigning the government, Putin's first two terms were marked by conflict and scandal. The rumors about corruption with Yeltsin and Putin referenced by Sophia is the Maidan bribery case. Maidan is a global engineering and construction company. It was hired for several huge renovation projects in Russia. Yeltsin's family and Putin were subjects of a criminal bribery case. Upon Putin's election, the case was dropped. Putin won his second term in 2004 with 71% of the vote. Over those 8 years, Russian opposition was slowly overwhelmed, as Sophia says. In a previous episode, we reported that Anna Politkovskaya, a journalist investigating Russian corruption in the military, had been poisoned in 2006 and then later shot and killed at her apartment in 2008. They found the 5 men responsible for the shooting but never figured out who paid them. And the Dissenters' March, led by chess champion Garry Kasparov, was an opposition rally that was met with fierce police force. The Chechen War, the Kursk submarine disaster, the Moscow theater hostage crisis, the Beslan school hostage crisis. None of these things were handled very well by Putin. Now, that didn't really matter, because after 2 terms, Putin's time should have been up.
In 2008, there was a problem. According to Russian constitution, you can be a president only 2 terms.
But what is an authoritarian to do when the Constitution stands in his way of permanent power? Well, you can trust that there's always a plan. In Russian, the term comes from chess, rokirovka, or castling. Sophia explains.
What was the plan? It was quite simple. Putin has a kind of also right hand. This right hand was his prime minister, Dmitry Medvedev. And as far as we understand now, Dmitry Medvedev was completely Putin's yes man. Putin created a system in which Medvedev could not afford himself to be independent because his money, his property, status, all of that dependent on Putin's will. Okay. And Medvedev is a very rich person. He's got a lot of money. He's got few yachts. He's got manors in Crimea and stuff like that. And even I've heard today probably, I've heard that in Finlandia, local police now this day try to arrest Medvedev's yacht. Very, very expensive, like some very, fashionable. So it was a kind of rokirovka. I don't know the English analog. That's a term from Schachmat.
Chess.
Chess.
Castling. The king of the castle.
It was named rokirovka those days. So Medvedev became a president and Putin became his prime minister. They changed position, exchanged. But everyone really in Russia and everyone, as far as I know in the outside, understood that Medvedev just was a Putin's person. He was like keeping a place for Putin. And of course, this result, I should also mention that during these elections, 2008, all persons who could challenge Medvedev, they were denied access to these elections.
Again, our interpreter adds context.
It was growing in our character to not think about politics. So Russia in their history never had this habit to vote for something or to choose something. So, I mean, it never was in Russia because we have a king like Tsar, then we have a party like Lenin, Stalin, and so on, but we don't have this mindset to vote, to choose, to be active in political way.
Like we have 1 year of democracy in 1917, unique year in Russian history when there were free elections.
Mindset is more like we have some small group of very smart people who can care about all of you, but you have to care about your small life. We have a lot of jokes about people who talk about politics. We call it couch politicians, who are sitting on a couch and discuss politics. So discussion about politics, it's more reason to laugh about the people than to really have this conversation. Because for example, I would talk for myself. I've never lived with this feeling that I can make real impact there.
Yeah, that is a kind of a patrimonial pattern in Russia. So it's like, okay, you have not this tradition of democracy, you have not this tradition of making some political decisions, and people just don't know how to do it, how to use it, how to practice it. 2008. That was another problem, also very important in this era. The economy in Russia
So the economy was developed and growing very well, and people becomes more wealthy. And for this reason, their loyalty to the government also growing, because they start to feel that like several years ago, I'm not able to allow me to buy a car, but now I can buy a car. So we're moving in the right direction.
This situation was due to high oil prices, because oil prices were very high. Yes, and people became richer and richer, and that was probably the first period of richness in Russian history, because in the 90s and 80s and 70s, people were really poor. And in, like zeros, people became a little bit more wealthy. So that was a kind of ground for their loyalty. I remember even this talkings about, okay, maybe Putin is not so nice person, such a nice person, but we are living better. That is important. Then 2011 happened. Why this year was important? Because we had elections, parliamentary elections. It's called Duma. So we had these Duma elections. And these Duma elections were completely stolen or falsified. And these falsifications, they were obvious. Like there were a lot of photos, videos, interviews about these falsifications. Just imagine that. Just imagine. We've got a graphic diagram in prime time in governmental television where they show the results of the election. Like these results, they were split into percents. Yeah, and if you sum all of the percents, you've got not 100% as you should, but like 146%. Yes, in state television, it's a kind of a meme till nowadays in Russia. 146%, 146%. These falsifications were not only obvious, they were just thrown into our faces. Like, we can steal everything, we can steal your voices, we can do it, in the bright light, daylight, and no one can stop. And that was, the starting point for the Russian opposition. That were the first massive protests in contemporary Russian history.
I want to pause for a moment. Keep in mind that Russia as an independent nation has only existed for 2 decades at this point. From 2011 to 2013, the Snow Revolution, the series of protests prompted by fraudulent elections, that was a series of massive protests against United Russia. That's Putin's political party. And I remember these protests well. My daughter, 10 years old, was born in 2011. We're not talking about ancient history. Putin's government wasn't ready for protests, and they weren't ready for opposition. Sophia describes these protests. She was there.
100,000 of people joined this protest, and we've got a lot of meetings this winter because elections took place in December, so that was winter. And I remember, quite well. That was very cold winter, and like minus 20 degrees, really quite cold. And you're staying during this meeting, during this protest, and people are trying to speak something with the microphone, and everything is frozen. Okay, I took part. That was, the beginning of my political life. Okay, I was very young. I was 17 or something like that. And I was also outraged because I was outraged. There should be said some, like preview things. Because I remember this, as I said, quite well. And I remember that firstly, these protests against falsifications, they were very popular, and even some politicians, even some high-ranking politicians, they also said something, поддержку, supporting this protest, like, there were some falsifications, that is not good, probably we should do something, and stuff like that. So it was a kind of a popular support. And then government really was very afraid. They were caught completely unprepared. They don't have anything to suppress this protest. They don't have, properly riot police. They don't have, laws to punish oppositioners. They didn't have anything, and that's why they were so afraid, and that's why they decided to take the second route. If you don't have measures, if you don't have, brute force, you should use propaganda. And it was a man in Putin's inner circle. His name is Vyacheslav Surkov. He was a kind of writer, politician, polittechnolog. It's like Dominic Cummings during Brexit campaign. Surkov was a person like that, Surkov is very pro-governmental. He's a kind of apologist of the Russian authoritarianism. He's completely nuts. That should be said in the first place. Yeah, he's crazy. And he always writes these articles about Russian needs. They need Tsar, and Russia should be monarchy, and Russia should be an empire, and we should, conquer all our neighbors. Surkov is a kind of a gifted man, in evil way, in evil manner, but he is a gifted man. And he created completely a heavy campaign to blacken the opposition, to blacken the protest, to demoralize the opposition. His most important idea was that opposition is working on the West. Yes, and opposition are paying from the West and by the West and organizing by the West. And so West are trying to destroy Russia from the inside. With, so-called fifth column. This term, of course, yeah? So this term, fifth column, became really widespread and commonly used by the state propaganda.
And also very important point, in this 04, Orange Revolution happened in Ukraine. And also it was a huge message that do you want the same like in Ukraine? So a lot of people would die if you will continue to support the opposition. So, and also the second message was, does your opposition know how to rule the government, the country? Like these guys don't know how to rule it. They are voting for nothing. They just want to destroy what is happening right now, but they don't have their own program. They don't know how to rule the country. They don't know how to make any reforms. So all Russia would swim in the blood, but we will not build anything new and good.
We can state that that was a huge propaganda campaign in state-owned media, in the TV channels, and citizens of Russia. They were shown from morning till night how bad opposition is, how we got money from the USA government, from your State Department, stuff like that. Sorry, I didn't get any money from US department, and I am really sorry for that. Probably that was the way to.
So we have the exact same thing in the United States.
Wow.
America has, I think, shifted towards that sort of authoritarianism, and everybody who is against that is, a socialist or a communist, and we receive money from George Soros. He has personally funded the Black Lives Matter movement.
Wow.
And so all of the Hollywood elite, right? They are all in control of it. It's the exact same thing. They think we're idiots or children or naive or whatever.
Yeah.
Just totally invalid.
That's a pity, probably. Okay. To strengthen this propaganda campaign, they started to organize meetings supporting the government. supporting Putin, Medvedev, their policy and stuff like that. We called these meetings Putinks because it's like you've got meeting or Putin. Meeting is when opposition gather and Putin is when, some with this massive propaganda campaign, with these Putinks and stuff like that, they suppress protest for a while. And in 2012, in spring, there was a kind of a first blood on 6th of May, a kind of a march, protest march in the center of Moscow. Police attacked this march. Yes, and people tried to protect themselves. It was a kind of fighting. So it's kind of a bloodshed. Yeah, not a bloodshed in a proper sense. But after that, a lot of people were arrested and they were put in prison. They were detained because they were accused in attacking the police. And they served in prison 3, 4, 5 years. That was the first, criminal case against opposition. Yeah, they were trying to mobilize mass support to create different organizations. They fund some, parties, rallies, and stuff like that. But you can imagine they were really, also unpolitical or also very, they regarded all of this, rallies like fun. People from this movement are very cynical about their actions and about their motivation. And also, it is important to think about 2012. It's a kind of first religious repression, because now we have, as far as you know, very strong ties between government and between Russian Orthodox Church. It sounds also crazy, but yes, we have. And that began with the repression. Also was a very prominent case, this feminist organization, Pussy Riot. In 2012, Pussy Riots, they came to the Cathedral Christ of the Savior. Я правильно перевожу, да? Yeah, Christ the Savior, yeah. And then they, performed there a kind of a punk, punk prayer. They called that punk prayer. And they sang a song, «Богородица Дева Путина прогони».
Mother Maria, please put away Putin.
Please send away Putin. In Russian, that sounds better. You have to believe us. So these Pussy Riot girls, they were arrested and they were detained. So they spent 2 years in prison, for not respecting the church, the feelings of Orthodox Christians, and shit like that. So it was also, a side of a turn to this more orthodox, more right-wing politics, even in culture. And then 2012, it also was the end of the Medvedev's term. A big question was those days, who would be the next president? And as far as we understand, all of us, due to the Russian constitution, Putin could not be a president because that is prohibited in the constitution. But that was also, they created a massive campaign around all of that. Like Putin, he spoke in front of a rally, mass rally, and he told that he would become a president because people they want that. And Putin cried, and TV channels, they showed that picture when Putin is crying. So that really is nuts. Okay. So in this sense, 2012 was a kind of a turning point with the repression against opposition, with this orthodoxal turn, with the Putin decided to fuck up the constitution and the law completely and everything like that. After that, some people from this opposition movement. They desolated and they leave Russia. They left Russia. Two of my friends who were, active oppositioners, they left Russia in this period. And a lot of other people, they, lost motivation to fight, and they just, hide in their personal lives. This a common pattern in Russian culture, like hide in your small life. Probably I should mention that in 2013, Putin, now again president, made important moves to prevent strengthening of the opposition. So he created proper riot police. It's Rosgvardia. Nowadays, there are something like 500,000 of these riot policemen. 500,000. You can imagine? Can you imagine that? They're useless fuckers. I'm sorry, I hate them. They declared several laws against opposition. Like now, you can be detained, you can be fined, and the fine, is not a small sum, yeah? Like the laws against opposition were made more strict, more severe to frighten people. Okay, so we've got riot police, we've got these laws against opposition. Что там еще было интересного? We've got the laws against LGBT. It's a kind of it was called a law against LGBT propaganda. There is LGBT propaganda everywhere, in movies, in books, in songs, everywhere. And nowadays, government and Putin himself struggle against this LGBT propaganda. And when in Russian cinemas movies are shown with this LGBT, themes or heroes, sometimes episodes or heroes or even lines are just cut from these movies. There was a movie about Elton John. Do you remember this movie? It was a nice movie, okay? And they cut off the sex scene from this movie in Russian cinemas because this is propaganda, LGBT propaganda. You see this scene and you became a gay person. It's obvious. The children, they also became gays. Okay, that's all sounds really crazy, but you should imagine that all of that is packed in also in propaganda, yeah, and that was sold to people with the idea that these laws would help us to fight the West and to fight Western attempts to destroy Russia and Russian culture and Russian traditions and etc. Oof. So Putin in 2013 really struck back. And we could say that these protests of 2011, 2012 were destroyed. And then in 2014 Maidan happened. How Ukrainians called that? Они это называют революцией достоинства. Как это будет по-английски? Вы не помните, Анна? Of dignity. Ukrainians called that, yes, revolution of dignity. We named it Maidan in Russia, and Ukrainians also called it Maidan. Maidan, as far as I remember, and as far as, that is like a common thing, frightened Putin, like totally. He was, it was pure horror for him. Popular revolution in neighbor country. It is important to mention that the President Yanukovych, skинули. I just wanted to say that President Yanukovych, who was overthrown, I remember the term, right, during this Maidan, he was a Putin's puppet. So he was like a Putin's man. So it was a nightmare for Putin. He also was afraid of these protests of 2011. And now he saw the worst scenario. like in what sense this protests could evolve. Final form of every protest is Maidan. Okay, that was a popular revolution and Yanukovych was overthrown, but then people from Ukrainian parliament, they voted to overthrow Yanukovych and they voted to set a new elections. Putin, seeing this Maidan, he made his own move. And that was, move in several directions. In Russian, we've got a proverb, 7 бед, 1 ответ. 7 problems, 1 answer. That was something like that. He was trying in one move to destroy completely inner opposition, to suppress Maidan and freedom movement in Ukraine, and to raise his ratings. Because also should be mentioned that his ratings were, declining all these years. Because a lot of people were, they did not like his new laws, his new authoritarian laws. They did not like that he denied the constitution and stuff like that. So we've got ratings problem, we've got Ukrainian problem, and we've got inner opposition problem. What should we do?
So Putin, facing declining ratings and a massive opposition movement, turned to the fifth column, Russian propaganda. The propaganda campaign and the introduction of new, more restrictive laws, including the establishment of a riot police force 500,000 strong, useless fuckers, fines and imprisonment for protesting, and anti-LGBT censorship, was all sold to the Russian population as a means to fight the Western assault on Russian culture. The West became the enemy all over again. All the internal problems were not due to Putin's increasing authoritarianism, but by propaganda pushed into Russian society. And while it may seem nonsensical to us, Putin knew exactly how to boost his ratings.
Putin, he occupied Crimea, and that was a move to rise his popularity. Because amongst many Russians, especially older Russians, there were a quite strong resentment about Crimea especially. Crimea is Russian territory. It's not Ukrainian territory. Sevastopol is a Russian city, and all of that bullshit. It's a kind of, Weimar syndrome. Like Germans in Weimar Germany, they were winning about some territories that were taken from them by the Versailles Treaty. If you remember that quite well, Sudetenland and etc. So it's very alike. And Crimea was a nightmare, but now for the opposition. I also remember that quite well. People were, they were enchanted, bewitched, enchanted, something like that. I tried to, it was in one day, a lot of people in Russia started to adore Putin, to adore his policy. It's very alike to Austrian annexation. You remember Hitler firstly annexed Austria, and then he set up a referendum. And in that referendum, people voted to be a part of Great Germany, but we don't know the real, how true was this outcome, because people voted under the pressure of foreign army.
I was going to say, my understanding was they went to the city council building, and they called an emergency meeting. They brought military police in, and they forced the referendum. It was not like...
Yeah. It was not free. We don't know for real even now who in Crimea, who among the Crimean citizens were against it, who were for it. Okay, that's against Budapest Memorandum. That's against Ukrainian sovereignty. So it's like a completely lawless movement. It's real aggression, real annexation of Ukrainian territory. But it was really popular in Russia.
A completely lawless invasion. and aggression against Russia's western neighbor bore onto Putin a renewed popularity. His plan actually worked. It played on a deeper sentiment in Russia towards former Soviet territories. Specific to Ukraine, as Sophia said, many Russians didn't believe Crimea was really, truly a part of Ukraine. Russian attitudes toward Ukraine are largely paternal and chauvinist. Russia assumes the role of a big brother, a patronizing and dismissive big brother. Some Russians refer to the Ukrainian language as a toy language. They say their money isn't real money. It explains what comes next in the Donbass region, in Donetsk and Luhansk.
The most important thing about Crimea is that Putin's rating after that skyrocketed. You can't imagine that, but you should try. I fought with my own parents. Like they had not liked Putin before the Crimea, but after Crimea, it was like, oh, Crimea, Russian land, Sevastopol is a Russian city. And you're like, but it's sovereign country. You cannot enter your neighbor's flat and take TV from this flat. It's impossible. It's unlawful. It's unjust. But okay, as I think, as historians in Russia, I think it's a kind of appearance of this imperial mindset. Everyone in Russia, for real, remember in a sense that Russia was an empire one day. Yes, and Ukraine and Belarus and all these countries was a part of this empire. So it's a kind of a sentiment that this is not a proper countries. Yeah, there are not a proper countries. And Ukrainians are not a proper nation. But among Russian far-right circles, among Russian even not far, but right circles, the attitude towards Ukrainians were far more hostile. Yeah, it were not only jokes, it were not only slurs, it were not only, jokes about accent, about different words and stuff like that. Yeah, it was also a position that Ukrainians are a kind of a Nazi collaborators, yes, that they are traitors, and if, it is a thing that there are a good Ukrainian, and this good Ukrainian, he's funny, he's speaking with this funny accent, and he's loyal to Russia. And there is a bad Ukrainian, and this bad Ukrainian, he wants independence, he wants to live his own, life and to walk his own way, and he's bad, he's Nazi collaborator, he's traitor, and stuff like that. And among these circles, there were always talks about how we should return Kyiv, how we should return Kharkiv, how we should return Odessa, and other Ukrainian cities. So it's nowadays we're hearing all of that from the TV channels. We should say that this attitude toward Ukrainians, it was not like single idea, but it's more like a spectrum. Yeah, a spectrum in which some are joking and some are telling that Kyiv is a Russian city and Ukrainians are all Nazi collaborators and traitors. It's like a spectrum. Yep. Of course, we try to organize some rally against this occupation of the Crimea. I myself took part in these rallies, but okay, that was not so popular. And then Putin and his inner circle decided not only to annex the Crimea, they decided to grab some Ukrainian territories. The situation after Maidan in Ukraine itself favored it for a bit, because situation was, uneasy. That is understandable, because that was a kind of a power vacuum in the Ukraine. Some people were pro-Maidan, some people were against Maidan. So that's okay, that's understandable. That's how the revolution goes usually. Yeah, but Putin and his inner circle, they tried to exploit this. And they sent their proxies to Donbass region, Donetsk, Lugansk, and etc., because this region had a huge part a huge number of ethnic Russian population and of Russian-speaking population, because in the Ukraine, these are different groups of people. You could be Ukrainian but Russian-speaking, yeah, and you could be Russian-speaking Russian but Ukrainian citizen. That is important now to divide, yeah. So this proxy, they've got armor with themselves and they've got experience. There was some prominent person, Igor Strelkov, this is important, yeah. He had this experience in proxy wars in Yugoslavia, in Chechnya, in etc., in Africa and stuff like that. There were probably a few thousand of these people, 20,000, 30,000, we don't know how many, at least 10,000. Yeah, and they've got armor, that is important. So, put it simply, they just occupied cities, Donetsk, Lugansk, they occupied state buildings, they just, occupied these territories and established their own rule. And the Ukrainian army tried to kick them out, which is understandable because that is some, proxies from Russia. And the Ukrainian army succeed in some cities like Slavyansk or Mariupol, but in some cities, Ukrainian army did not succeed. And it did not succeed because Russian army involved, Russian regular army. It is quite important to understand that in 2014 crisis, Russian army get to help Strelkov and his proxies. So it was Russian army rescued his attempts. Of course, Russian opposition was outraged by all of that because it's obvious an aggression. It's obvious some strange people are doing some shitty things in neighboring country. But on the other hand, we should understand that also this Donetsk and Lugansk affair, it got massive support from many Russian people. So some of them were against, some of them were pro. I myself fought with my parents because they thought that the Donetsk and Lugansk is also Russian cities, like everywhere is Russian cities. So opposition could not exploit this topic to get massive support. It was impossible. If you even pay attention to what leaders of opposition said those days, you can see how they try to avoid to make some, statement about this. Like once Alexei Navalny, Alexei Navalny, of course, he was those days asked about Crimea. He said that Crimea is not a sandwich. You not return it. Okay, you could not return it. It's okay. That's fucked up completely. It's a fucked up idea. Yeah. Sandwich. If you grab it, you could not return it. That's because Navalny probably was feared to say something against popular mood. People were such in awe about all this grabbing of Ukrainian territories. Nemtsov was one among few oppositional leaders who speak loudly against this aggression, against annexation of Crimea, and stuff like that. And Boris Nemtsov, he was a prominent and influential person since 90s. He was a governor of Nizhny Novgorod. Nizhny Novgorod is a huge city in Russia. So he's like, a key person in opposition. He was like a Navalny. Opposition, as I put it, protested a bit, but not as active as probably we should have done that. And in 2015, Nemtsov was killed, was murdered near the Kremlin. This case was not, забыла, как будет расследовать. Yeah, it was not investigated properly. So till now, we don't know for real who killed Nemtsov. We know Putin ordered to kill Nemtsov, but no one really is punished for that. Oh, fuck. Fucked up timeline. Yeah. Timeline is a little bit more complicated. Like opposition tried to take part in elections, Navalny tried to be elected as a city council of Moscow, but voices were stolen as always. And after that, elections were not prohibited, but like stopped. Nowadays, we don't elect city council of Moscow, just for being safe. In 2017, opposition again tried to fight back, to push back, and this attempt is connected totally with the person of Alexei Navalny. He was the only one who stand. Nemtsov was killed. A lot of oppositional leaders, they left Russia. So like no one really could be the leader of the opposition except Navalny. And he tried to gather support with anti-corruptional, platform. Like he fought against corruption, he investigated corruption, very popular YouTube documentaries about corruption. The most famous one is about Dmitry Medvedev and about his property. Like 20 million people watched this video on the YouTube platform. So it was quite popular.
But I also would like to add that a lot of discussion was that Navalny is a pro-Kremlin guy who just tried, in my circle, that he's pro-Kremlin guy and that he was supported by Kremlin just to put away attention of the people and have a controlled opposition. It's like fake opposition. So you have a Navalny, pay him money, he create opposition around him, but you control Navalny, and it means that you control an opposition. So in my
circles, okay. Yeah. Which is total bullshit, but
I don't know the truth, right? And
it's also paternal position. Like no one really is a true oppositioner, so I would do nothing. I would just sit there in my flat and winning. Yeah, that's how it goes. My wish is to ask all of these people after that Navalny was poisoned, how they feel about themselves. What are their thoughts about the case? But okay. 2017, there were again massive protests of opposition. You can say that a lot of young people took part in those protests. So like Navalny and the opposition became popular among youth and not among elder people, because protest of 2011 was a little bit more protest of people who are in their 30s or 40s. And protest of 2017 is more about people who are in their 20s. But this protest also were unsuccessful because of this strict laws, because of this riot police. People were beaten, a lot of people were detained. So it's like a common picture now. Then next year, 2018, Navalny tried to rally for the presidential election. Yes, and he was not allowed to take part for some, like made up reason, but it was a kind of a point of crystallization for a new opposition. Because for this election, Navalny built a network in Russian regions, so-called headquarters of Navalny was in every city, in every town, and that was a kind of a magnet for opposition. And also appeared in 2017, 2018, a few new independent media, like Media Zona, which is a prominent independent Russian media about prisons, about judges, about juridical system and stuff like that. Appeared Libertarian Party, and they were also very active in oppositional activities. So it was like, a second brief, a new brief new appearance of the opposition. You remember those days? They were a kind of optimistical mood. So we can beat Putin, we can think of something. No, okay, Putin beat us. I should, yeah. So what was that like? So like elections in 2018, where Navalny was not allowed, were completely like, like a game. It was Putin, and he did not allow any real opponent to be presented. So he just allowed some, funny, odd people. That's not important. That was not an election. It was just like Putin just named himself again a president.
And also, I'd like to add that a lot of support was for pro-Putin regime was got from all people who work on the government, like teachers, teachers, policemen, and so on, because he increased the salaries for them, and it's bring to him a popularity. But in the same time, it brings him the way to control them. Because, for example, if you're a teacher and you participate in anti-government movement, you can be fired or you can have some problem on the work.
Like we told you about election falsifications, and who does these falsifications? They are done by teachers. For most of the time, yes. And why they falsificate the election results? Because they are forced to do that, because they're completely зависимы сейчас. Как будет зависеть?
Depend.
Yes, конечно, спасибо. They completely are dependent of governmental support, governmental money, and stuff like that. So that's, a kind of a paradox that people who are teaching children, they are criminals in a sense. They falsify the elections. Oh, that's the thing I like the most.
Yes. So if to summarize everything, so it was a very long way to this current point, and it wasn't like happened that we have democratics
at once.
Yeah, and in month we all country decide to fight with Ukraine. Something.
It was like poison of Navalny was a final shot, like in the head. From this moment, it was obvious that we live in authoritarian regime.
From Yeltsin's endorsement of Putin in '99 and Putin's election in 2000 to the annexation of Crimea and the Donbass in 2014 to the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the shift towards authoritarianism with red flags all along the way occurred practically in slow motion. The initial support for the Russian invasion of Crimea, the Donbass, and all of Ukraine has been bolstered by Russian propaganda. Many Russians believe these are spontaneous movements that arose out of Ukrainians' desire to reintegrate with Russia. Russia has pushed this independent actor narrative while denying that the Russian military plays any active role, but this is false.
Like Strelkov himself in the many interviews said that that was him. Yeah, like because he's a kind of a narcissist, as far as I get that, and he wants to tell everybody, like, and the Ukrainians they gave a lot of proofs about the presence of Russian regular troops in 2014. So it's like a proved story. It's not rumors. It's a proved story by many participants and by Ukrainian side. And even even if you listen to some Russian propaganda journalists from state television, sometimes they tell that was us in Donbass and Lugansk. Sometimes, But you are right that in Europe and in the USA and in the outer universe, they are pushing another agenda, like, oh, that was a spontaneous popular movement and we've got nothing to do with that. Yeah.
We in the United States are also doing a bad job understanding the war in Ukraine. We are getting a lot of our talking points, both from the far right and the far left, from Russian propaganda.
Yeah. It's a kind of, like it was called in Soviet times, useful idiots, different politicians in the West who, for some reasons, are aligned with, Soviet policy, but these politicians think that they push their own agenda. So it's a kind of, because yes, of course, and even this, like famous ЧВК Wagner, I don't know how to call ЧВК in English. It's like not state-owned troops, but like Анна, как сказать, что это частные войска, частная армия?
Like private army.
Yeah, like private army, famous ЧВК Вагнера, we call it in Russia. ЧВК, частная военная компания, private-owned military company. Yeah, so Wagner himself, Wagner is a second name. He is a far right and he is Nazi. Wagner is not a real name. It's как это pseudonym. It's pseudonym name, and he literally is a Nazi. It's not, like metaphor. So yes, and Rogozin, Rogozin, the head of Russian cosmic aviation, Rogozin is a far right man from right wing party, so he's also like kind of a fascist guy. So yeah, we've got a lot of this kind of people, and yes, in Donbass, most part of them are really far right, white supremacists, and literally like that. Yeah, but also we've got, these far left groups, and nowadays some of them, they support the war against Ukraine, yes, from this far left perspective. So that's, and in the West, Russian propaganda pushing all these two agendas, far right and far left. Funny to see that, but yeah, that's how it works. And there are fundings, yeah, and they sent a lot of money to these far right or far left parties, yeah.
And we wondered, because of our American centrism, if Donald Trump's praise of Putin had much of an impact in Russia.
Well, mostly he was relevant. Like when Trump was elected, that was a kind of popular approval. Like, yeah, Trump is a normal man, like masculine man. Finally, eventually, because in Russia, people hated a lot of this, like propaganda-minded, conservative, right-wing, pro-Putin people. They hated Barack Obama, and all, even because of some racist prejudices, I should say. That mostly they just don't like him. And Trump was like their man, like mujik. But then they just lost every interest in him, and it was like.
I also saw a lot of jokes about Trump, that he's stupid, that he's a funny guy, and that he's like a businessman who just try everything in his life. Like, oh, I want to be a millionaire, bomb. Not like he already was burned like a billionaire, but like, oh, I would like to be a president, bomb. Like he was in some circles, he was considered like a crazy funny man. Like like clone. But other and also another point of view was like he's a smart man because just the clone are able to say like that probably he's a smart man but very like with a special way of representation. So also I heard this opinion.
But mostly people were not interested in him quite. Yeah.
We understand the current global animosity towards all things Russia. We wonder again, in a nation of 140 million, why can't they overthrow their government? Why can't they dethrone Putin? And we hope this episode gave you some answers on that, because nothing is ever as straightforward as we'd like, even when you're looking at the horrible atrocities committed by the Russian army against Ukrainians. When we talk about dystopian societies, most commonly George Orwell's 1984, we decry the oppressive government of Oceania that controls everyone's lives. We're rabid in our hatred of government control. We call upon the image of 1984 to preview what could happen to us if we give up our freedoms. But little attention is given to the protagonist of 1984, Winston Smith, who in his rebellion is beaten further into submission, re-educated. We can see from one side of the curtain that we have a lot of freedom to lose, but it is more difficult to understand that on the other side of that curtain, there is only state-approved freedom. The freedom to see what the state wants us to see, to behave as the state wants. None of this, of course, excuses Russia from the atrocities in Crimea, in the Donbass, and in Ukraine as a whole. Thanks to activists and historians like Sophia, we're able to glimpse behind the curtain and understand the political and contextual background that shapes the present. That work makes it possible to change the regime of control, the regime of blood and soil. It's those oppositional efforts that make all the difference, even when all you see is blind loyalty. We again want to thank Sophia Shirogorova for her time, and it was a lot of time, as well as our interpreter and fixer Anna for providing translations and adding her own commentary. Lastly, this is yet another reminder to check out helpingtoleave.org. That is a network of over 300 Russian activists who work 24/7 to get Ukrainians financial aid, food, clothing, shelter, and even coordinate evacuation efforts and activities for them. helpingtoleave.org.